All right, well, let's go ahead and get going. I'm going to switch this order just because of who we've got on. I can figure out what the right buttons are. There they are. Danny and Georgi, I think Kieran just joined too. Cool, perfect. So restarting, restaging, repushing apps without downtime. It's a good idea.
Yeah, we have been exploring this thing in Kubernetes, stateful sets, deployments, and maybe everything that's connected with replica sets has this way of restart. You can do kubectl, rollout, restart something, and eventually all pods are restarted in sequence, respecting the pod disruption budget so that you don't have downtimes of the app. Of course, you should have at least 2 pods running. If you just have just one, that cannot happen. And we're wondering, can we actually implement something similar for Kurifi, just make use of this feature in Kubernetes? And we had a little spike, so it turned out that restarting a stateful set is really simple. You just put or change an annotation on the pod template spec, which causes the replica set controller to restart pods gracefully. So what we did, we just re-implemented the restart endpoint of Kurifi. Instead of doing stop and then start an app, it just puts an annotation on the CF app, which we called Kurifi Cloud Foundry or restarted at, which is just a timestamp. And we propagated this annotation down to the stateful set. And this worked pretty well. So the next thing we tried was to use the CLI to restart an app and see how it goes. We found out that the CLI is actually explicitly stopping an app and then starting it again. So we had yet another prototype change that instead of doing that, just invokes the restart endpoints. And having those changes, we can restart, repush, or restage apps without any downtime. Just Kubernetes is doing it for us. So we were wondering, what do you think about this idea? Probably this means that we may no longer need the upref annotations, which has been controversial in the past. So if that's not needed anymore, and of course CLI accepts this change, we can just get rid of it and have this no app restart. Another change that we actually had to implement was to have stable app workload names. This is because if, as of today, the app workload name is derived by the upref version annotation plus the process name, and then hashed. So if we have unstable app workload names, this means that whenever you restart an app, it is going to delete the old app workload and create a new one, which recreates the stateful set. So you're losing this nice feature from Kubernetes. So we made the app workload actually take the CF process name. So we guarantee it's stable. That may be a thing that someone finds a bit controversial. So yeah, what do you think? Is it worth trying to finish that and have this nice feature? It's also worth mentioning that the restart of an app, according to the CF API docs, means stop and start, but we can be better than Cloud Controller.
Well, Cloud Controller has the ability to do this. Like there's a flag for the CLI where people can opt into this, where you do strategy rolling. Like I'm wondering, why don't we try to get that working versus like changing the behavior of the regular push? I think that will be less surprising to people that might be expecting like a clean stop and start from CF push without doing this.
I didn't know that, but yeah, maybe we can do it.
I think if we got that working with this, then that all sounds great, because like that's kind of how it works on CF, where if you specify this flag, it hits some different endpoints, but it will do like a slower like rollout of the processes on Diego kind of like what the stateful sets and stuff do.
But
It's a deployment endpoint, right?
It hits the deployments endpoint, but we can make the deployments endpoint do whatever we want.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
And like our version of that could do what you all have done.
This is for app pushes. I wonder how you use those same endpoints for just restarts. Because this change we've been discussing is about restarts. Like,
Oh,
can you do
sure.
rolling restarts in CF?
I think, yeah, there's a rolling restart flag.
And does that use the deployments endpoint too? Does it deploy the same version?
It deploys the same, it's a deployment with the same version of the code.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, even restage has that same strategy flag where it accepts rolling or no.
Okay, so yeah, I guess we could think about implementing the deployment endpoints at this point, like supporting them in all cases. But if we do basically every rolling, like every command that takes strategy rolling, will start working if we implement the deployment endpoints. Yeah, maybe.
Why would you want to do it the other way there? Like when I restart, I want all the pods to disappear and then to come back again.
I think there's less justifications for the restart versus the push. But when we first rolled it out, like we had discussed making rolling the default strategy for restart such that it would always use it. And there was a lot of like fear and uncertainty from like the operators and stuff we talked to about that, where they were concerned that their apps couldn't handle that. I don't know why. I just know there was concerns about it. But like I think if we support the deployment endpoint and then like the CLI later makes a change such that it does rolling by default on regular CF and Karifi, then we would just pick that up by free. Like that's the mechanism it would do it. I'm not sure if there are other things I'm not thinking of why the cleaner like stop and start is useful for that, but it may have just been people were scared.
But this means that if you want to do this, you have to create a deployment first.
Yeah, I mean it's like the Cloud Foundry concept of deployment, which is just the act of deploying the app. It's like a build where it just tracks that it was rolled out successfully, and then like it's like a resource that the CLI can then watch to then tell like the user, okay, like all the replicas or instances of this have completed rolling out. You can stop paying attention to it.
So how do you restart a deployment? I'm looking at the specs and I don't see a way to do this.
You create a new deployment and the new deployment takes an app, which is the only required parameter. So I suspect that if you just create a deployment with an app without the droplet, it just uses current droplet and restart in a rolling way, I believe. I'm looking at the docs and the app is the only required parameter. So that must be it. The droplet defaults to the app's current droplet. So effectively you post to /v3/deployments with the app GUID and it just restarts it because it's like it redeploys it with the same droplet.
But then it says you can get a deployment, which means that a deployment is a thing that you can get and list and cancel it. Whatever
Yeah,
this
it's
means.
implemented as a full resource.
Yeah, I mean we don't like have to
Don't
go
have
and
to,
implement all of it immediately. Like if we wanted to just support it for CF restart rolling, then like you could do what you're doing right now in the deployment endpoint. And then if there's a desire from people for the ability to cancel a deployment or roll back, then like we could think about what that means. But like that could be something that never comes up.
There's a chance that the CLI is polling the deployment to wait for it to be done.
Yeah, the CLI is definitely doing that,
Yeah.
or at least it's polling to wait for the first instance to be healthy. One of the two.
So we need to be able to implement get somehow, maybe with the same strategy we use for jobs, where like we get clever with GUIDs or something. Because if we don't plan to store this thing in the database or as a resource or anything, then yeah, we'll have to be able to tell the CLI, in case there are a bunch of deployments ongoing, which one is done, which one is still rolling, you know, that kind of stuff.
Which honestly is actually the main benefit of supporting this is right now with push, you have a fairly clean idea of once push exits, then it's done and your new app is rolled out. If we move to rolling and you have like an app with like 10 instances, like push will probably exit like before that's complete, and like that might mess up people's scripting and CI around that.
Yeah, it's all a matter of, I guess, checking how the CLI behaves, because it could be waiting for, because I see when you get a deployment has does it have a status field? It doesn't seem to.
It should. I don't remember. I'll have to pull up the docs too.
Yeah, it does. It has a status which can be active, which means it's in progress, and finalized, which means it's finished, either successfully or not. It looks like the docs contradict themselves a little bit, but yeah, there is a way basically to tell if it's still ongoing, done, failed, succeeded, whatever. So if the CLI waits for that before returning, then we need to be accurate in those return values. If it doesn't, then we might even, maybe hack it somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's worth playing around with. I think, but I do think what I just said is one of the main reasons to use this though. It's like we want like that behavior where push exits once everything's running is something people definitely rely on.
So it could make sense to have sort of a little epic or something to implement to explore how much of these endpoints of this resource we need to implement and then do it.
Yeah, I don't know if this will ever happen, but like one of the goals with this deployment resource was for every app lifecycle change in CF to go through this. So like even restart, they were going to add strategies like recreate and stuff. So like you do like CF restart strategy, recreate, and those would all eventually go through this mechanism.
Which is what Kubernetes does pretty much.
Yeah, that's kind of what we were like inspired by or giving off of.
All right, sounds like we've got some digging to figure out what we ultimately want to do with this, but I don't hear a whole lot of more stuff going on. Maybe we move on to the next one.
There was a thing about the revision, which is a little bit orthogonal, honestly, but we were just wondering, what would you think? Like, if we introduced this timestamp annotation, we could semantically put it like not restart timeout, but start timeout, and then when you change, not timeout, timestamp. So if you stamp the time of start, then you can change that later on, and this will cause restart of all underlying pods. And I guess we could reuse such a timestamp thing for fetching the most recent logs or metrics, which could potentially render the revision thing redundant. So what would you think of this? Are we maybe missing some use case? I remember that we had discussions about this a couple of months ago, but it's like a new angle to it right now, slightly related to this no downtime thing. Because right now we have a hook that's watching the status, and if it transitions through stop, I think it bumps the revision by 1, making sure that that it changes on every restart. Like if you stop and then start, or just do a restart. We could just simplify this webhook to put a new timestamp, and it would still be a like changing, increasing kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess it depends if there is nothing that depends on that number per se, then
So
we can get rid of it. If there is something that depends on it.
when I looked at it last week, it seemed to be that it was written to guarantee that a restart does actually do a restart. Because a restart in what we're saying now, if it has to be a stop and a start, that can happen so quickly that the reconcilers miss it. So they just see, like the app workload reconciler would see my app's in a started state and then do nothing. And the app is running. Yes, that's the result I wanted, but it didn't go through the stop start cycle. So it looks like the logic that's introduced is to go and name the app workloads after this app rev thing, so that they forcibly change, even though the reconciler didn't spot that the app went into the stop state. The webhook did, and that means you get, and that the app workload reconciler deletes all app workloads that are on the wrong app rev and reconciles, well, creates them with the new app rev included in the hashed name. And the result of that is your stateful set gets deleted and a new one gets created. So it's quite a blunt instrument, but I think that's why it's probably there, as well as correlating the logs somehow. So yeah, if we continue to have to support the restart means stop it and definitely stop it and start it, then it feels like we still need something like that. Otherwise, the reconciler can just skip. It might just not notice that the app was stopped. But I still sort of question why we want to do that. If somebody's issuing a restart command, why can't we just do a Kubernetes restart on it?
I think that also puts assumptions though into like the runner implementation, like if it can cleanly throw that annotation onto the deployment or stateful set on the other side. Like I'm wondering, like, I don't know if there's other runners that might break due to that.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like if because we propagate the annotation, right? If there is anything that depends on it, of course it will break. So we might have to keep it for that reason.
Well, yeah, I mean, but they're kind of mutually exclusive. So you can't do a graceful restart with that functionality there. If it's relying at the app workload level, it's going to go and cascade a delete down to all your running stateful sets. And we need to get rid of that to do a graceful restart. Then I'm not sure what the middle ground is there. Because we're just relying on deletion and garbage collection to enforce a restart at the moment.
Yeah, that was one of the things we had to change, right? We made the name without workload stable.
Yeah.
I see. So the problem is not getting rid of the annotation per se, it's not using it to calculate the name anymore?
Yeah. And getting rid of, there's that logic that says if I find any app workloads that have a non-current app rev on them, I delete them.
I see. Yeah, which means when we bump that number, you get a new thing, and then that logic will get rid of the old thing. See.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah, I guess we need to sit down and think about it.
The thing is, it's absolutely beautiful and it works. It looks like Kate's. And
it's just, but if we want the other behavior, what CF does is it has both behaviors, right? If you do CF restart, it does stop and start. So CF restart on traditional CF, like the /restart endpoint, is not rolling, right? It's pretty much stop and start. Then there is the CLI, which does literally /stop and then /start. And then there is the deployments thing, which does the rolling thing. So there is this. So we need, as an API implementer, we need to basically, if we want to behave exactly like CF, have the restart endpoint to stop and start, and have the deployment endpoint to roll. What you're telling me is that that might not be possible. We might only be able to support one of the two things.
Yeah,
both.
it kind of feels like you'd be forced into reproducing the CF behavior of creating a new deployment and then manually rolling your instances from one to the other.
Mhm.
And we don't want to do that because stateful set control is already doing that for us.
Unless there was like some way to push this down to the runners, like we like add something, a status where it's like, I want this to roll out or something, and then they can do that.
Yeah, so that was our idea to, because the way Kate's is doing it is with an annotation. So if we just annotate the app workload, and then can that be pushed somewhere? So that's the question, I suppose.
I guess I'm wondering also if like same annotation thing could be said to recreate. Like you'd still have to change what's currently being done, but where you have a stable running target and then you, I don't know, mess with it. This definitely feels like something needs more thought and like broader discussion on though.
There's the question of the annotation. Like we have stuff that depends on the annotation, it can't go away. That's one thing. And then there is the question of, yeah, we want the old behavior instead of this new rolling behavior sometimes. So can we support both? Because like, even if we manage to support both, but without the annotation, there will still be a problem if there is runners depending on the annotation, right? So there is this, we need to kind of think about both those things.
Sounds like we need to do that, but maybe move on to the next topic for now. All right. Dave, I'm looking for you to do your best Julian impersonation.
Sure, I'll do my best Julian doing a British accent impersonation. So yeah, we were just going through the status conditions on the custom resources for an internal telemetry project yesterday, and we noticed a lot of the lower resources like the build workload, app workload, and so on, don't have status conditions at all to indicate that they've been reconciled and what their state is. And we were wondering whether that was something we should try and have more consistently across all of the resources, or whether that's just not necessary.
Got a bit of deja vu there.
Yeah, yes. I think we have talked about this before.
Yeah.
So didn't somebody have a list of standard conditions we should be thinking about adding as well?
Maybe. That sounds vaguely familiar.
In general, I think it's a good idea also because I think there might be a whole bunch of endpoints that we implement that should actually block in a way and wait for some operation to be done, and currently cannot tell. So they don't block, they just return. And that might be misleading. So I think we solved some of these issues when this thing has become problematic. The way we solved it is we add a condition and then the endpoint waits on the condition. There's probably more places where we need to do that. It's like, okay, you've created a route, fine. Like, is it return when it's ready or something? Because we've seen cases of, yeah, I post, I get a 200, 201, and then the thing is can't be used yet because it's not ready yet. And that's because our thing is not reflecting the underlying resources status, etc. So I think once it's kind of a good practice that will lead to also a bunch of improvements in behavior potentially. Like, because once we start adding those, we can start going through the endpoints and be like, oh, should we actually be waiting for these conditions? Feels like a very good pattern for something so asynchronous as Kubernetes. It's the only way you can actually, stop and wait for something to be in the condition you want to be before carrying on. And given we are like a REST API, which is very synchronous most of the time,
we should be doing that. Yeah.
we should be doing it and leverage them to be properly synchronous, as in like to block until things are actually working. That's one thing. The other thing is probably, yeah, it just gives you a better idea of when things fail. Because that's the other thing in Kubernetes, you don't have like return, you don't have status codes in responses. So like if you create an invalid resource, you don't get a 400 back. We should reflect stuff in the conditions so that we can return. It probably leads to better error messages as well, stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. This is reminding me of like when I was debugging one of these situations with a user and build workload wasn't reconciling, but the only way to know was look at the logs for the KPAC image builder. But so
sort of orthogonally, or maybe connected, is the observed generation as well. So when you're setting that on the status along with the conditions, that's really helpful as well. I mean, I've been looking at a lot of the KPAC stuff at the moment, well, recently. So if you modify an image, you get the image back and you can look at the generation on the metadata. And then like sometimes we have to look at the status and check we've actually got an update for that generation, and they store latest generation on there, and that's very useful. We can catch it when builds don't get created and things like that.
Yeah. So we don't talk about this again in the next, like 3 months from now. What's the best action item? Should we have an issue per resource? Or?
I would say if you already have the list, go on. Otherwise, if you want a pair to figure out the list, maybe write an explore or something.
Okay.
And say output of the explore should be a document or a list or something, like something actionable, or even the list of stories as well. You could say,
yeah,
you can tell the pair, go on and write the stories. And the stories are great. I guess, well, like, how much do we want to go into detail? Do we need to figure out which conditions make sense for each resource as well? It's not just about coming up with a list, is it?
Right, it's about knowing what conditions each resource should have at that point.
Yeah, which ones make sense. And then you can write the stories, I guess, and say, okay, when I create a thing, it should be in the I should see this condition, and then I do this, I see this other. Potentially one story per condition if you want to go very granular, but maybe one story per resource is probably enough.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we could do both of those. Like, it sounds like you and Julian identified a handful of ones already, which could just have stories and then have the more broad thing.
I mean, I have a list of resources that don't have any conditions, but I don't know that I'd have to do more research to figure out what conditions should they have. So maybe starting out with an exploration and I can put in the list that I have in the description of that, and then a pair can completely flesh that out and decide this is what we think we should add, and they can create a story for each one at that point.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool.
There was a funny case we were looking at the other day on the KPAC image builder. So if we detected that the KPAC's done a background restage, or it's detected build packs of changes, so it creates a new build for the image, that means the app's out of date, and we're wondering how we could, like, what we could do. So it was like, oh, should we get the app to go and pick up the latest droplet? But then, or at least we wanted to go and tell the developer that the app is out of date, if they could look at some sort of status. But then we're stuck in the KPAC image builder. We can't actually get past that boundary of the build workload. So it'd be nice to document or extend the status conditions on that thing to ship information up to the app somehow. Like you could have an is latest condition that gets set to false, and then something else can be noticing that somewhere. And that bit, I don't really know how it gets to the user at the end of it, but you need some sort of dashboard, don't you, or some metrics coming out. But yeah, I guess we should stick with the basic is ready one or something for the time being.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's something worth exploring for sure, though. It's like, how do we feed him information back? So. Alrighty. Well, there are no other topics. Anything going on in people's minds that we should talk about before we get on out of here?
A quick one about the status of selecting a build pack, just to let everyone know what's going on with it. So now you can do a CF push and do -B and pick one of the build packs from the cluster store. There's a funny condition in KPack. So if you pick, like if you've got a Node app or something, and then you go and pick the Java build pack and you push with that first, you'll get a KPack image, and then it'll create a build, and that build will fail because you picked the wrong language. And then you go, oops, I'll select the right Node.js build pack and then push again. And at the moment, KPack says, I can't detect that you've changed build packs because I refuse to look at failed builds. I think they half acknowledge that it's a problem, but don't know when they're going to get around to fix it. And they've been suggesting some workarounds. I need to go and validate if any of those will work. But at the moment, the code's in there, and it notices that a build wasn't created. So it says it returns a KPack build not created error, and the message says a build wasn't created. Maybe modify your source and repush. Feels like the best we can do.
Maybe change languages and repush.
Well, no, they've picked the right language. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's at that point, until you modify the source, KPack's never going to create a new build for you.
Got it. Okay, that makes
You
sense.
can change the language in your application and push again with the same.
Yeah. Was like one of their workarounds, was it setting an environment variable of like a timestamp or something, or like to jiggle it?
And if we did that, we'd probably have to do it every time, and then which isn't good, because if your 1,000 apps get restaged in the background, and then you go through and do CF restage on each one of those to pick up the latest droplet, you want it to be instant because the thing's already been built. But if we're setting some timestamp in an envar, the thing's they're all going to force rebuilds. So it doesn't sound like a good idea. Potentially, we could wait until we find a build isn't generated and then do something like that. Although Tom Kennedy said something about setting an annotation that matches with your build pack, and yeah, I don't know where he was going with that. I'll have to experiment when I get some time. But yeah, at least we've had some response from them.
Yeah, that's good. Alrighty. If there's nothing else, take some time back.
Good.
I'll catch y'all later.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.